not many people have looked at, and what we're not really talking about very much on any level, is about teacher well-being and what kind of mental state teachers need to be in to teach to the best of their abilities. And what we know is that if the teacher is in the right place mentally, if they feel good about what they're doing, they're going to teach better. They will be more creative, they'll be more motivated, they'll be more engaged. And it actually starts off this sort of positive cycle that if the teacher's in the right place mentally, there's a very good chance the learners will be too. So one of the things that I'm keen to stress is that looking after teacher well-being, making teacher well-being a priority, understanding teacher psychology, shouldn't be an optional extra. It shouldn't be considered some kind of luxury. It's actually fundamental to what it means to be a good teacher.
For a lot of teachers here, they'll be saying, okay, that's great, but how do I look after myself? There's so many constraints. There's so many constraints of my time. There's so many other things that I need to be thinking about, whatever. What can I do to make sure that I'm looking after myself as a teacher?
I mean, I think one of the first things that we all have to decide for ourselves is what our priorities are in life. And this means really taking stock of what's important to me in terms of life goal and professional goals. So one of the things that is perhaps misunderstood and oversimplified is this idea of work-life balance. We have this idea that there's some kind of fixed proportion of work and life balance that we should be aiming for, and that's just not true. Everybody has to find what works for them, and particularly for teachers, there's not usually that sort of strict separation of work and professional life. They're very blurred. So it means by starting to sort of say, what are my values, what's important to me, what am I satisfied with, looking at the different areas of my life, so my intellectual well-being, my emotional well-being, my spiritual well-being, and my physical well-being, and then really having to sort of do an audit and say how much am I attending to this, and does that match up with my priorities? Do I feel comfortable with that? Do other places I need to make adjustments? Whatever job we're doing, we all find ourselves in the position where there's way too much to do and not enough time. So I think the first thing we have to do is we have to sort of brutally set priorities, and we have to learn to say no to things, and we have to learn that some things will not get done. But it's making the decisions about what those things are and saying they have to go.
Okay, but how do you make those decisions?
Only you can do that.
Could you give an example of maybe of a way in which you kind of were able to make those decisions?
I think one of the things I've learned is that you have to keep trying to do it. You don't get to a point where, oh, I have the perfect work-life balance now, I'm happy with everything as it is, I don't need to do anything. I make sure that I take holidays and I book it off when I'm on holiday. I'm really on holiday, that you really switch off. One of the things that's coming out of research is this concept of detachment, is really being 100% in that moment of not being in work mode. I think that the big thing is making the time when you're not at work quality time. The other thing, and that also comes from some of the research we've been doing in positive psychology, is really learning to understand what's within my control and what's not. If I can't control it, I just let it go. And I feel very strongly that if I can start to see the positives in everything that's around you, there's a lot of research that your well-being is influenced by positive thoughts and positive well-being. So they teach you, for example, to do gratitude.
Okay.
Where, and I have been doing this for about a year now, and I find it very helpful, is at the end of the day, I just take a minute, literally before I go to sleep, and I just think of all the things in the day that I have to be grateful for, and that went well.
C'est bon ça.
It's very nice. And I tell you, every day there are so many nice things that happen, and there are things that you are grateful for, and the more you start to think of it, the more things you become aware of, and it's actually very easy to take note of.
So, from what I've understood so far, if I were to make a list, and résumé, I would say prioritize.
Absolutely.
Make sure that the time that you have off work is off work, so quality time, and thinking about what you're grateful about after doing it after
finding
the day.
The positives in your life, finding the positives in your life, finding the positives in your job. It's not to deny the negatives, and they're things you'll have to cope and deal with, but it's learning that there's a lot of positive things, and sometimes we take them for granted, and becoming consciously aware of them can remind us that actually there's a lot of very good things going on as well. What
would be specific to a teacher, maybe, in terms of well-being?
I think it applies, you're right, I think a lot of this applies generally to people who are working in all kinds of professions, and I think this problem with work-life balance, though, is perhaps particularly acute for teachers, because there is a very blurring between work and private life. We're very dedicated, it's very much part of our life and part of our identity, so very often we define ourselves through our work, more so than in some other professions, although, of course, other professions have this as well. And so I think sometimes finding this distinction and finding how to manage this balance between these different areas of our lives is very difficult. And I think teaching is inherently a stressful job. I think teachers tend to be very other oriented, so they tend to give a lot and feel guilty for paying attention to themselves. And I think that is also a problem, is that talking about your own well-being, talking about your own needs, talking about looking after yourself is something that sometimes teachers feel guilty for, because they're so other-oriented, they're so oriented to helping their learners and being there. And while that's always going to be a priority for us, if we start to understand that if we look after ourselves first, we are better able to be there for our learners. So it's not selfish at all, it's actually just good practice.